Welcome to your Next Stop podcast. Welcome back to your Next Stop. This is Juliette Hahn. I say it every single time. I love bringing you guys people that have followed a passion, turned it into a business, and just do really amazing things that we can learn from and get motivated. So welcome, Erika Ayers, to your Next Stop. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really excited about this on so many levels, but let me just give a little background so people can, I know when people listen, sometimes they like to be like, wait, who am I listening to, right?
Why am I listening to this person?
So you're a digital innovator. You are an author. You were the first CEO for Barstool, and now you are the CEO for Food 52, and you were on the board for many years before that and just joined recently.
Yeah.
So that is you. So I am excited on so many levels because when we did our 15-minute kind of let's talk, we definitely were like, okay, we see each other in a different, we could feel we could hang out and have coffee, tea, drinks, talk about kids, there's so many things that we just were really comfortable about. So I would love just to kind of start with a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up? And a little to start there, and then we're going to get into your life.
So thank you so much for having me. I was born in Colorado, but when I was, in early elementary school, we moved back to the East Coast. So my dad was from Vermont. My mom was from Connecticut. So we moved back to New England. I grew up in New Hampshire. And both my parents were teachers, and then my dad was a principal and then a superintendent. So both my parents really worked in education. And we kind of grew up in this crazy household where you could read, stack wood, play sports, and that was pretty much the only option in our house. So
right.
I had kind of a small town New England childhood. Both my parents worked. We worked a lot. I, got a job as early as I could. I liked clothes and I wanted to be able to afford them and go to TJ Maxx and Marshalls. And so I knew to be able to do that, I would have to have a job. So I've had a lot of jobs since I was very young. I went to college in Maine, and then, I really started working right after that. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I worked at Fidelity Investments and jobs, that people were like, ooh, those are big jobs. Someone should have that forever. And I was like, I hate this. I, don't want to be doing this. I want to do something that makes me happy. And I jumped into the internet. I was really lucky to start working in the internet when, the internet was just getting exciting in the late 90s, and then kind of had a meandering career from there.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things. And I think that you can feel that, that you came from where you worked at a lot of different jobs. And I think that's so important. And one of the things that raising kids myself, I know you're raising kids as well.
Yeah.
I always say, it doesn't matter what mom and dad have. There's things that we do, whether the neighbor does it, other family members, cousins do it.
Yeah.
Getting that job in the beginning to me is so important, because I always say it's so important to find out what you don't like and what you don't want to do. And I remember saying that from when I was young, because I also was the same, grew up in kind of very traditional. My mom was a teacher. My dad was in real estate.
Yeah.
And there was 5 of us. So it was I wanted to get clothes. So it was okay, I babysat. I, did
do whatever you need to do.
Exactly. And I think that it was it really, not only did it give me worth ethic, that is one thing that's very obvious, but it taught me really where my strengths and weaknesses were, but what lit me up and what I liked. So can you take us through some of those early jobs that you were you did it just to get the money, and others that you maybe enjoyed a little bit more?
Totally. I mean, I worked from it sounds like you were the same, from probably when I was 13, 14, the babysitting gig. I hated babysitting. I really absolutely hated babysitting. I found it tedious. But I knew I could always get more babysitting gigs because I always cleaned the kitchen after I babysat, which today is still my bar. If the babysitter comes over and she washes the dishes I'm okay, I'll have you back. So, I think you learn things even in the jobs you hate, and you're this is terrible, but you learn some trick in it, which is kind of how I approach work. I also really liked work to be funny, and I always wanted to learn from characters at work. So I worked in restaurants. So I worked, at this restaurant in Weirs Beach in New Hampshire, and it was run by, what felt like mobsters, and it was just like dingy and terrible. And I remember the toilet broke once, and my brother and I made a sign that was like, the bathroom's on the fritz, and we thought it was so funny. Like, we chose just like the funniest word. My brother also worked at the restaurant, and we thought we were so funny. So I also knew really early on that I like wanted to laugh at work. Like, I wanted to be able to make fun of work while I was at work. And then I agree with you. I think it's good to work, it's good to work in all different types of situations. It's good to work with people who, it's easy, I think, right now, especially with parents, of like, oh, I'm just going to go plop my kid in a job where I know the boss and it's going to be cushy and it's going to be great. It's good to work for people who could care less about who you are and where you're from or what you have or what you don't or who your dad is, which, I really enjoyed that because it made me have to figure out all different types of people and figure out all different types of situations, which I think is really important.
Yeah, no, it is. And, it's so funny because I actually babysat at 11 for a family across the street that had neonate newborns that were in like, they were like premature.
That's stressful.
Oh my God. And I was 11 years old. I, again, lived across the street. The one little girl's head fit in my hand and they came home with heart monitors. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
And the parents, who I absolutely loved, they were these like cool, like, they were like, you're good. They're not going to die. We're in the hospital. They have to wear these heart monitors. If it beeps, just touch them a little and you're good. But we need to go out. We need to connect. And I remember learning from some of the families, some of things that I was like, I want to incorporate that in my life.
Yeah, I think that's great.
And so I kind of always took it at that, like, what can I learn from this family of things that I want to do or don't want to do?
Definitely.
And that's why I loved babysitting for that reason. And it was like,
you get to see how a family works. And then you're like, ooh, I like that. Or I don't like that. Or,
and I'm still in contact with a number of the families that I did. And I will always kind of say to them, hey, like, now that I'm in this stage of my life and, married for 21 years, like, I just want to thank you guys for that, like, for some of the things that you showed me. And thank you for some of the things that, also you were like, yeah, this is like, you don't want to do this. Right.
Yeah. That's great.
But and same with like you working with your brother and kind of going through that it's such an important thing that you got early on. Like, I want to have fun because so many people, right? They go to college, they go to university, they think they're supposed to do what like the neighbor does. Right. And so many people on this podcast that I've talked to where it was like, I became the lawyer, I became the doctor, but early on in my studies, I realized I hated it and I didn't want to do it. And I'm like, well, why did you continue it? They're like, well, I thought I had to until, they had the breakdown in their 30s and then they changed. So, okay, take us after college and you getting into like early, as you said, you were like, did some finance stuff and it was like, okay, I definitely want to do this. How did you after like you started seeing the internet and being like, okay, this feels good. I talk about like the good feels and that was a good feel. I was kind of in the working world during that time. And I remember getting the first .com and people were like, I was in advertising, like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know. This is so fun, but it's like new. And I think we can make our own rules, which I loved.
Same. Yep. Yeah. I mean, it was fun to be at the beginning of something. Now that would be AI, right? Like what's happening in AI is like the internet when I was coming out of college, and people coming out of college now, I think, can look at AI as like this frontier of like, you don't really know who the winners are going to be. And there's a big bubble that's growing. And so I think it's really interesting to be in sectors of the industry that seem unknown, and especially when you're young and you don't have a lot to lose, because then if you work someplace that you don't like, you can, the knowledge you're going to get is super transferable. So, when I really started my career, I knew I wanted to work in advertising. I knew I wanted to work in content. I knew I wanted to work definitely on the internet. And I was kind of scrappy. I was like, hey, I had taken a big pay cut when I left Fidelity. I left the legal department. I was making like $50,000, and then I went and made like $16,000 or $17,000, and it was like scratch on the record. And then I was very hungry to like get back to making $50,000. Like in my head every morning when I went to work, it was like, how am I going to get back to $50,000? But that was actually good for me because it kept me really motivated. I think what's hard right now for kids coming out of school, I think it's hard for kids coming out of school, and it's also hard for moms who want to go back to work. I think kids coming out of school are, I have a college kid who I'm friends with and, friendly with. And he's like, I go to Princeton. I need to go work in finance. Everybody from Princeton goes and works for finance. And I was like, well, do you want to work in finance?
Right.
I was like, why don't you start with that question versus the other one? So I think I do think it's really dangerous to get on a conveyor belt that you're not super into. And it is totally okay to take that first job and it's not perfect. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it may not be the job you want. Like, it may not be the place you want to work or the person you want to report to or the city you want to live in or whatever. But if you just get your foot in the door, something really good can happen. And I wish for people that they could let go of, that's why I called my book, Nobody Cares About Your Career, is that like really at the end of the day, nobody cares about your career. So just start doing something and then figure out who you are and what you want to be.
No, 100%. And so people also, they can find you on Instagram at Erika, and that is Erika. And then they can also find you on LinkedIn, where you spend a lot of time on both of those, so they can find out about your books.
I don't shut up about this topic. I can talk about this topic all day.
But because it's so important though, because I feel like there's, if we look back at our parents' generation where, it was like, okay, this is the cookie cutter, this is what you should do. And it really was kind of muting your happiness, right?
Yes.
It was kind of muting your happiness. And now I feel like there's such a divide where we still have those people that, right. Like, I mean, I still will talk to people and they're like, well, no, my kid needs to go to this college. And I'm like, why? What who are, like, what? Like,
100%.
oh, I didn't realize that you're still on that. Like, right.
Yeah.
Or, and we talked about some of the areas that we have lived in and some of that, sometimes it happens in that
really big, it's great. I think there's a really sad thing where, I think something is happening with people in their 40s or, parents of like grade school, middle school age kids where one is that the pressure to be so great, whether it's like you're going to be great at athletics or you're going to be great at, Mandarin Chinese or like the pressure it's just so high. It's stupid. And it's also a lot of money and it's a lot of effort. And, I think we're spending all of our time, or there's a lot of people spending a lot of time in this, like, oh, like my kid's got to be a great athlete. I was a great athlete, or, I want my kid to go to this school because I went to that school or whatever. Mm-hmm. And the reality is like our kids are like nuking their brains on their phones. And like, maybe we could like have more conversations with your kid and worry less about, is he a great linebacker or, are they mastering Chinese? Like it's a little screwed up, I think.
It really is. I mean, I remember when I first moved to a certain town and I was like, we were digging in the dirt, my kids and I, we came from Brooklyn and we were digging in the dirt and someone said, hey, do you want to join, Chinese lessons? I mean, Chinese with us, and it was Mandarin or something like on Saturdays. And I was like, cooking. I was like, I'm so confused. And they're like, what are you talking about? No, the language. And I was like, wait, what? And my kid was like 6 years old. They're like, we do Mandarin all day Saturday. And I said, wait, you go to class? I go, listen, we're dyslexic.
100%. We're just going to have Saturday.
we're going to go dig for dirt and sell worms 100%. or eat worms. Like, really, I'm like, whatever. Because that's what makes us happy right now. But I remember that being like, so, oh my gosh, a lot of people do that. And so I said, like, why? I'm just curious, like, why are you doing that? And it was like, well, his dad's in finance, so we want to set him up for that. And I was like, I remember not being really close with these people because I think I said, that sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah.
Like, what does your child want to do that? Like, are they even going to get a choice? I was like, oh no. I was like, we're not like those people.
We're digging around. Yeah.
We're going to look dirty and like play in the dust.
It's crazy because I think the other thing that, I see it a lot in the workplace, right? Like Barstool, we had 400 people when I left. Food 52, which is the company I run now, has, 150 people. If you're put on the track where your mom or your dad is like, one, it can just be so defeating if that's not what you want inside. And I think listening to anybody, whether it's a kid or a grown up, it doesn't matter. But then the second piece is if they're so managed, when you get into a workforce and you've been like driven here, told what to do there, taught how to think, like, people aren't able to think critically and work dimensionally, and it becomes really, really debilitating. I think this type of parenting is putting like really making kids really fragile by the time they get to the workplace.
No, and I'm sure you've seen it, running these companies. I'm sure you've seen it in different generations,
Definitely.
right?
Yes, it's crazy. I mean, it's our generation. Like I'm in my late 40s. Like I hate to say that, but I'm in my late 40s. Like this group wanted things, like you wanted the office, you bought into this thing of you got to work and you want the dream and you want the stuff. And it's interesting as you go down the line, you talk to 20 somethings now, they're like, I don't know if I have to work, I guess I will work, but I don't really want to work. And I'm only going to work the least I can. So it's a really different mindset.
It really is. And right. And to say one is better or worse, I don't think any of that. Yeah, neither.
Like, all right.
I think it's what makes us happy and what makes us better people. And when we put ourselves in a place where we're fulfilled and we're good, we then kind of can spread it to others. Yeah. And I think that's what's so important. And I think that's what I love about your background is that you really, at Barstool, just reading up on some of the stuff that you did was really innovative, but was also like, you really cared about the people and you cared about growing a brand. So can you take us through that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I got to Barstool in 2016 and there were 12 people. So it was like really small. Maybe there's 15 on the outside. And they were really, really deeply committed to the brand, but they didn't have a lot of support. They didn't have a lot of guidance. They didn't have any business. There wasn't a business really. I mean, it made money, but it wasn't something that could scale, which is really what I brought into it. But, we moved everyone to New York. So we uprooted all those people to move to New York. And, no one knew where to live. No one had a dentist. Like they didn't, like they all lived together. They all lived in no one had ever lived in New York City. I felt a little bit like a mama bear where I'm like, okay, like this is going to be the dentist. And like, this is like, okay, this is a grocery store, like whatever. So I remember I had hired an office manager who was straight out of college and was moving from Buffalo, New York, and he didn't have a place to live. And I was like, all right, well, like you can live in my spare bedroom. Like, so it started like that where it's very fun to work with people who are younger than you. And I also think kind of in a different, like the gender thing, I was the only woman there at the time. Oh, hold on. We have a dog coming in.
I love that.
Sorry.
So are you kidding? I'm the biggest dog person. I have boxers. No, not at all. Hi, Bubs.
Oh, where's your sister?
Wait, that is hilarious. I have 2 boxers and I actually I muted myself for a second because someone let them upstairs, even though I said, hey, I'm going to be recording from this time. I have no, one of the things that I love that you just said though, is about the dentist, because my line is, so I do a lot of work with the NFL thread, which is like the LinkedIn for the women of the NFL. So like the spouses and the partners. Yeah. And one of the things I always say to them is when you move, it's like, oh, I got to find a dentist. I always use
it's the worst.
It's the worst.
Finding a dentist is the worst because the dentist is the worst. So you're like, I wanted the least bad dentist. I actually love my dentist.
I was going to say, I love my dentist too, but a lot of people do have that hang up. And it is one of those things that you just painted a picture that so many people can relate. You're moving to a new city and yes, it can be so exciting, but then there's things like the dentist, right? The doctor.
It's like a network and, so it's a lot. And we were, I think I joined at a time where, most people were really young. They were in their early to mid 20s. I was probably 40, not even. So I was in my late 30s and we kind of just built it together and went through a lot. Like Barstool was big and controversial, was little and then controversial, and then it got bigger and got controversial. But I do really think you always have to care about the people and you want to work at a place or work for a person who cares about the people. Mm-hmm. And caring about the people can still mean that you're tough and you're hard charging. And, I was really hell bent on getting good results, but I also cared a lot about people individually. And I think it's important also to be in a place, people can tell instantly if you really do care about people or not. Like it's like, you can't bullshit it. It's like, or you don't. So I think more important than working at a cool company or in the right whatever is like, do you work for someone who's going to push you to someplace new and also care about you?
I love that so much. Okay. So on that same kind of thought process, do you think that that's something you saw, like that you were born with? Because I always think these innate things, or you learn them in different aspects. Like, can you take kind of your whole career and think about, okay, this is something that's a core value of mine, and this is where I kind of got it. It was like really, embedded in my home, or I had a job that the person did not care, and I knew I was not going to be there. Was there kind of a time in your life that was something that you decided, I am going to be this person, or do you think that's just innately who you are, or both?
I think it's funny, because my dad was the school principal, and we were always like, we were at every sporting event. This is like the most ridiculous.
I love this so much. You don't even know.
You're keeping this, right? We gotta keep this video.
Oh, so I was, after we stopped recording, I was gonna be like, okay, I want to keep that, but if you're like
keeping the dog, yeah,
we're 100% keeping the dog. So it makes me so happy. He's like, pay attention. Yeah, no.
So I'll answer. So I think, my dad was a workaholic. I remember he was getting his PhD for most of my childhood and, working full time. And I watched that. I really picked that up in my household. And I also picked up a lot of the like, hey, you got to show up. You just have to show up. Like it's Sunday afternoon and there's a softball game, and didn't matter whether anyone in our house cared about softball or not. Like, we were going to softball games. So so I think I learned a lot of that. My parents were very kind. And I think I also like really picked up on the kindness, but they weren't pushing in the way I think the people you and I are around, where there wasn't any expectation that my brother and I should be a certain thing, but there was an expectation that we would be constantly learning. And learning was a non-negotiable in my household. So I think I always had that. And then I worked for early in my career, when I worked at mostly ad agencies, that there were interesting leaders, and I learned probably more about what you shouldn't do than what I should do. But when I really started to go work for big companies like Microsoft and others, the caliber of people were insanely high. And I learned, how to be much tougher and how to be much more disciplined. So I think long answer short, it kind of both.
It's all encompassing, right?
Yeah,
which is cool. It's one of those things that kind of built you to be the leader that you became and that you are, which is huge. So you kind of were in those spots. And I think the learning part is huge, because that made you always be aware, the curious part of you that kept open. So it's like, let me see what I can do to continue to grow. And I think that's some of the things that a lot of people miss. And that's one of my favorite things about life is curiosity and constantly learning from others around me, whether they're a janitor or the president of a company. I want to talk to you. I want to learn about like what you're about and what makes you tick. And that like lights me up. That lights me up so much. And so I love that is something that you have there as well. Let's talk about, if we can, your book, No One Cares About Your Career, Why Failure is Good, which is so important. But where that came from.
So I wrote Nobody Cares About Your Career on the train. So I wrote it, I have a long commute, and I wrote it on my way to work and on my way out of work. And I was writing it, we had just sold Barstool Sports to Penn Entertainment, and I was feeling like my job was really kind of changing, and this wild creative thing I was running. I was now going to like strategery meetings. It was just much more formal and much more finance driven and much more it was just more big company. It wasn't so wild. And I was missing the creativity of Barstool. And at the time I was getting a lot of messages on the internet with work questions. And I was like, gosh, it'd be more efficient if I just answered these, in a book versus answering people's DMs on the train, which was really what I was doing. And so the book really, it's in 3 parts. And the reason I think it's interesting is I think it's helpful whether you're like early in your career and you're trying to figure out what you want to do with yourself, whether you're in the middle of your career and you're kind of like, I don't know where to go, or my boss is an idiot, or how do I manage this type of situation? It goes really through how do you be successful at work? And then the last piece is how do you know when to stay at a company or make a change? So, and the reason I wrote it is that I think those are the three places people get stuck when it comes to work. I think work is pretty significant. Most people work now, like one way or another. Work is obviously changing in terms of what work means and where work exists and all of that. But what I thought was really important is that, I think the two things that hold people back are their ego or their insecurity. And so to your point, like I talk to everybody, like whether it's a janitor or it's the traffic guard or it doesn't matter to me. I literally could talk to the wall. So I'm like, but it's a good habit to hey, you can learn something from everybody. That's not having an ego. And then on the insecurity side, I think a lot of the times people hold themselves back at work or in their career because they think they can't do it. They think I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not qualified enough. And I also think that's really dangerous. I think it's dangerous to think you're too good. And I think it's dangerous to think you're not good enough. And then the second part of the book is kind of funny, where it reads like a conversation. I'm in the middle of my career and I'm writing what I'm experiencing. And it's really, all the different types of bosses. Who is the dumbest person in your company? The dumbest person in your company is the person who doesn't understand what you get paid to do. And then the last part is okay, what do you need to do if you're thinking about making a change? What happens when you get laid off? What's burnout? How do you deal with burnout? So that's really the gist of the book.
I love that. So when you decided you're sitting on the train, you're doing these DMs, how many times did I'm going to write a book come into your head before you actually started doing it?
Not very much.
I love that. I knew that was going to be the answer, but I was I'm so curious.
It's kind of random. It really doesn't read like a book. My first line in the book is I don't really know how this book thing is supposed to work, but here, it reads like I'm writing an email on the train, or I'm talking to somebody like you and I are talking. But I never thought I would be a CEO in my life, and my family isn't corporate. I never thought I would be a CEO. I love being a CEO. I never thought I would write a book. I didn't, ever think I was a particularly good writer. I loved writing a book. So it really, I kind of on a whim found someone and made a proposal to a book publisher, and they were like, oh yeah, we would do that. And I was like, oh, all right, I guess I'll just write a book.
And those kind of things, because when people listen, we'll get people that listen to the podcast a lot, and will sometimes say it flows for others and it doesn't flow for some, right? Yeah. And I think what the lesson and the message I always tell people is, if you don't start something, you're never going to know.
Yeah.
Right.
If you don't try, you'll never know.
You'll never know. And sometimes when we have these ideas and we start putting kind of our feet in front of each other, and it doesn't kind of come out the way we are thinking, or it goes a different way, it just means that wasn't your path. And so clearly exactly. This book was supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And did you ever, as you were starting to do it, did you ever think in your head, okay, if it goes a different way, maybe this was just fun and it was kind of like a collaboration and it's not going into a book? Was there any times that you ever questioned it, or was it a pretty smooth?
It was pretty smooth. It took me, I felt the way you described. If nobody picked it up, I would have been all right, whatever.
That was fun.
I got plenty of things to do.
Right.
But it did. I care a lot about work. I care a lot about my work. And I always have been a little bit too emotional about work. I felt like I cared too much. So I always felt like this book has been in me, because it's the caring too much that I'm now giving to other people. But once it started, it's, it's a lot of sitting. It sounds stupid, but I was I've gained 15 pounds. You just sit. It's a lot of sitting. I'm not a person who sits a lot. So I think it was a lot of sitting. That was the hardest piece of it. I'm ooh. And I was writing too much. It was really got pared down, but it wasn't easy, but it was in the flow.
Right. Which is interesting. And I love that you said that like sitting part, because it takes discipline. Like if you're
Yeah, that
doing
was tough.
right. And did you have to kind of set yourself up and be like, these are my writing times. I have to write whether I want, because you have a family, you have,
Yeah.
as you said, a day job. And so how did that kind of work? If you can take us through a little bit, it was like, okay, this is the times I have to do it. Or was it kind of sporadic? Like, okay, I feel like I want to write. I'm going to go run and do it now.
How would I describe it? I felt like it was a little bit like college, where like in the beginning I was kind of rushing the term paper, where I would just like, I knew I had a deliverable of a date where I had to have so much written, and I just would like jam it at the end. And then that really didn't work for me. And then the second piece was I was starting to write it kind of like iteratively, like where I would be on the train and I would be like, okay, I'm going to get this done on my commute to work. And then I'm going to get that done on my commute out. But then I would come up with like 15 different things based on what was happening today. And that kind of got like unwieldy. So by the end, it was nights and weekends, like it was most nights every week. I would get home from work, like shove some food in my face, like hug my kids, and then get on the computer and start to write.
So when you look back on like, and I usually don't go like, if you look back on these kind of things, but I'm just actually very curious. Do you think that your kids later in life will say, my mom wrote a book and I loved that time? Like, will they look back and think, like how you just said, you noticed that your dad was workaholic?
Yeah.
And I'm going to go somewhere with this. And the reason why I'm asking you this, I'm finding very curious as I'm raising kids and as my career has gotten bigger. I think it's really important for men and women to kind of think about this. So
I think my kids will say that I was really into them, but that I was a workaholic, that I worked a lot.
Right.
And I don't know that they would discern the book from the other book, like it's your mom on your computer, but I think they would say I worked a lot. And do I think they would enjoy it or not enjoy it? I think they would say they are proud of it. And I think it will be good for them to see a woman in particular and a mom. Like, I think they will appreciate the journey. And to be honest with you, it's really all my kids have ever known, because I just always worked so much. So I don't know if that's good or bad. I think other people would say it's bad. I think some people would say it's good. I think that's just kind of how our family works.
Right. No. And I think, as you said, it works as your family. And the reason why I asked that is I just turned 50 this year, and I'm in a new career. I'm the chief communications officer for a company called FedTech that came out of the business that I started on my own as a storytelling consultant. And so I just recently have had this conversation with my kids, because I do tons of stuff for a foundation. And so I have just kind of said to them, like, they can tell when I get stressed and I'm a little like overloaded. And now that they're teenagers, I'm like, okay, I would love to have like sit down and really talk to you guys about this. And one of the things my oldest said to me, which is kind of similar to what you said, he said, it's been really cool to watch, Mom. Like you stayed, right? Like you stayed home with us, and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm going to start a podcast. And then all of a sudden it became this business, and then it became this other thing. And it's been cool to watch. And I was like,
sweet.
It was. I mean, he's 19, so it's like, he's older, so he can say that. My daughter, who's a little younger, she'll say, well, I can tell when you're a little overloaded because you get a little grumpy. But I think having those conversations, and for the listeners to think about that, I think it's really important, because we're humans.
Definitely.
And to say, you know what, I maybe bit off a little like a tooth the last month, and I need to sit down and reflect on it. And that's what we should teach our kids. Like
100%. Yeah. Like I agree with that. I think I'm with you. I'm in the same place, and hopefully, my kids in 5 years will say something brilliantly nice about me. But, you do have to be honest. Like, they have bad days at school. They have good days at school. I have bad days at work. I have good days at work. We have bad days as a family. We have good weeks as a family. Like, so and I agree with you. I think you always have to, it's such a journey. The whole thing is such a journey, and there's high points and low points, and being able to reflect on it, I think, is such a good skill. And then also being able to, talk about it. Like, hey, I was really stressed, and here's why. I had this mentor once who was very, very successful in the ad business, and he was kind of like an institution. And his son found him very intimidating. It kind of came out when his son was a teenager that the son kind of always felt like daunted by the dad, and he was never going to be as good as the dad, and blah, blah, blah. And the dad got the feedback. And what the dad started to do was to share his problems at work with his son in a way of like, hey, I'm really stressed about this thing. Because for me, when I tend to be a little cranky and like bitchy at home, it's because I'm stressed. It's because I'm like,
totally.
I don't know my way out of this situation, or I'm really bothered by something, or something's not going the way I wish it would, or whatever. But he said that by talking to his son about it and showing vulnerability, it's actually what made him and his son connect. And I think that's, I had a breakfast this morning with a woman who runs a mom's group, and she was telling me how she thinks most women in her network are working and miserable. And I was like, that's like such a crappy thing, but you're probably right. And then I was like, well, are we talking about why people are miserable? And like, are we sharing that with our families? And like, is everybody in this, like the mom helps everybody else. It's like, could everybody else help the mom?
Right. No. And I got the chills when you were talking about the ad exec, because that could have went two ways. He could have heard that feedback and just been like, okay, I'm doing the best that I can. But the fact that he was like, no, I want to connect with my son.
Yeah.
I don't want my son to feel that way. I want to bring it in. And I think it's so important that a lot of times people think kids are kids and they're like, oh, I don't want to burden them with this or not. But when kids get older, if we think about when we're older, like we want to understand, right? And understanding, when you understand your parent, oh, okay, that's what's going on. Like, okay, mom's traveling, so she's trying to get everything together, making sure the dog sitter's there, all of these different things that when sometimes it's overloaded on us, and it's okay because we're human, us to snap at others. No, maybe we can do it a different way.
Yeah.
But let's, like, if you see moms like that, hey, maybe ask for help instead of trying
be empathetic. Like, why is she stressed? Like,
right. And not overly where you feel like you need to fix your mom, or like you need to fix your person.
You're not responsible for your mom, but like, I think it's just like being honest.
Yeah.
Like it's what's everybody's expectations of one another. And I think it's awesome that, it's hard to take on something new, like this. I wrote a book and took a new job in a month's time. And that was too much. Like it was bananas. It's been like a banana 6 months. And I talk to my family about it all the time. I'm like, I think I just took on too much. And it's good to talk about.
Yeah, because it's also good for them to see and see how we navigate. Good and
what
bad.
They're going to take is like, ooh, when you're in a situation that feels a little overwhelming, are you going to like pretend it's not happening? Are you going to complain about it? Or are you like going to actually do something about it?
Do something about it. And right. And how, like, healthy habits, right? Yes. Like, what am I going to, and I like reflect back at times, maybe when I stayed home with the kids, and, maybe it was like weeks where they were young and I was like, oh, let me have some wine, I look back at that and I'm like, oh, okay. That, now that they're older,
it's all a journey. It's like,
it's all a journey. And being okay to talk about it, Erika, I think is what is so important. But there's so many people that don't do it because they feel like that it's embarrassing or they're less than. That's why I started my podcast when I did. I started it in 2019, and it was called, it first was called Next Stop Crazy Town. And it was little personal journal stories.
That's great.
Because people would say, I had just moved, and people, I was doing, I did a lot of fitness stuff. Okay. So I would like like if we were at a swim lesson, I'd be like, hey, I played sports like in college. So I was like, it was always kind of something. So I'd be like, hey, ladies, do you guys want to get on the lawn? And I called it Ladies on the Lawn. So I did this. Yeah, it was just like this kind of the thing, but I would go on social media and talk about it. Hey, I'm going to go here. And this is, the fitness stuff people have been asking me. So I had a stint of that when I kind of went back to work when the kids got a little older. And I remember just being like, people being like, oh, you have it together. And I was like, okay, if you open my front door, you'd be like, oh, this lady does not have it together. I was like, and I would be on, on social media, not having it. Like, I'm like, you really thought that was together? If you think that's together, what? Okay. I mean, I just maybe have good genes, but it's not together. Yeah. So I started really talking about all of the things in my life with my kids and before when I moved to the city that I like. My kid fell out of his high chair right after Britney Spears. And I remember being like, oh, Britney Spears, what kind of mom is she that her kid fell out of his high chair? And then literally 2 days later, my kid, and I was like, oh my God. Yeah. So I was like, we can't judge each other, and we're all trying to do the best that we can.
Totally.
And the fact, like, if we can connect and talk about it is what kind of so that's how the whole podcast started.
So cool.
With little personal, like 15-minute little, like, here's my shit show.
Yeah. That's perfect.
Right. Because it makes it more real. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that you're sharing, you're so real, right? But then also in the book, things that you have done that you can then help kind of that next generation, that reader, be like, I get it. I can connect and I can relate.
Yeah. My hope is like, just like with your kids, like my hope is to just give, hey, like I've messed up in every aspect of my life in every way possible. And this is what I've learned from it. And hopefully someone takes that and they can learn something and then make their own mistakes too.
I love that. Okay. So people can find you on LinkedIn.
Yes, they can find, sorry. Find me at the dog part.
What's the pup? What's the dog's name?
Her name is Angelica. And
Angelica, I love you. You would have so much fun with the boxers. You would have so much fun with the boxers.
She's really cute.
She is so cute. And you have two?
She has a sister. So
she does.
So it's Angelica and Tatine. But you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me anywhere. I'm on the internet.
And everyone can find your book in all places.
That's right. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is such a joy. I'm so thankful for sharing the story. And thank you, Angelica, for joining your next stop. You guys know what to do. Like, rate, review, and share. And we'll see you for another episode of Your Next Stop.
Great.
Okay, that was
fun. Thank you so much.
Yes. I'm so sorry about the book because I was like, I wrote it down and I know, but I was like, I usually am like, I have it in 2 lines and I'm like, wait, is that too
long? And you're not the first person to do it. So don't worry.
Okay, but still.
Don't worry about it.
No, this was so much fun. I mean, like, look, I love you. I wish I could kiss your face, you silly girl.
Take a picture. This is so funny. Wait.
This is so funny. And my editor is going to, I am probably one of the biggest dog people ever. So like the fact that it happened is like,
I mean, it's so ridiculous. It's just so ridiculous.
Okay, and she's like leaning. She's like, done.
I'm the star.
She totally is. No, but thank you so much. And I'll let someone's out the window.
Crazy. Okay, I'm gonna go.
Yes, I appreciate it, and I will let your team know and everything like that.
And let's stay in touch. I would love to.
I would love to stay in touch. I would definitely love to stay in touch. All right, happy Friday.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.